I still remember the precise moment the illusion of my perfect life shattered, and it didn't happen with some grand cinematic explosion. It happened with the quiet, mundane sound of a key turning in a deadbolt 20 minutes earlier than it was supposed to. I was 32, living in a beautifully renovated craftsman home in the suburbs of Austin, Texas, with my wife, Clara. We had been married for 4 years, together for 7, and if you had asked me that morning, I would have told you our relationship was rock solid. We had the kind of marriage people envied. We communicated, we laughed, we supported each other through career changes, and we still genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Then came Leo. Leo had been my best friend since our freshman year at UT Austin. We had shared cramped dorm rooms, survived terrible entry-level jobs, and stood as best men at each other's weddings. But while my life had moved in a steady, upward trajectory, Leo's had recently hit a brick wall. His marriage had ended in a messy, financially draining divorce, and his freelance design business had completely stalled out. When he called me one Tuesday night, sounding smaller and more defeated than I'd ever heard him, asking if he could sleep on our couch for a couple of weeks while he got back on his feet, I didn't even hesitate. I didn't even feel the need to check with Clara first, though of course I did, and she agreed instantly. She knew how much Leo meant to me. We both wanted to be the safety net he needed. Looking back, the signs were there, buried under the guise of gratitude and domestic routine. Leo moved in, bringing just 2 suitcases and a cloud of quiet desperation. For the first few weeks, he was the model house guest. He cleaned the kitchen, offered to buy groceries, and spent his days hunched over his laptop at our dining room table, hunting for jobs. Clara was incredibly accommodating. She would cook extra for dinner, make sure he had clean towels, and include him in our weekend plans. I felt a profound sense of pride seeing the 2 most important people in my life get along so well. We started spending our evenings sitting on the back patio, drinking craft beers, and talking about old college memories. It felt like a strange, nostalgic throwback, but with a comfortable adult twist. But as the weeks bled into months, the dynamic subtly shifted. The 2 weeks turned into 2 months, then 3. Leo's job hunt wasn't going well, and he started staying home more, retreating into the fabric of our daily lives. I was a senior project manager for a commercial construction firm, which meant my hours were long and unpredictable. I was often out of the house by 6 in the morning and didn't get back until 7 or 8 at night, drained and covered in a thin layer of dust. Clara worked from home as a freelance copywriter, which meant she and Leo were sharing the house all day, every day. I started noticing small things, the kind of insignificant details you only recognize in hindsight when you're desperately trying to piece together where everything went wrong. I'd come home and find them laughing in the kitchen, a shared joke lingering in the air that would abruptly stop when I walked through the door. It wasn't a malicious silence, or at least it didn't feel like it at the time. It felt more like I was interrupting a rhythm they had established in my absence. Clara started changing her style a bit, wearing nicer clothes around the house instead of her usual oversized sweatshirts. She seemed more energetic, more vibrant than she had in a long time. I foolishly attributed it to the fact that having Leo around was keeping her from getting lonely during her long workdays. I trusted them both, implicitly. Leo was my brother, the guy who had held my hair back when I drank too much at 21, the guy who had looked me in the eye before I walked down the aisle and told me I was the luckiest man alive. Clara was my rock, the woman I had built a vision of the future with. The idea of betrayal wasn't even a whisper in my mind. It was a physical impossibility, a statistical anomaly that could never happen to a marriage like ours. Then came that rainy Thursday in mid-October. I was supposed to be on a site visit out in San Antonio, a 2-hour drive each way, followed by a dinner with the regional stakeholders. It was a massive project, and I had told Clara the night before not to wait up for me because I probably wouldn't get back until midnight. But around 3 in the afternoon, the sky opened up. A massive thunderstorm rolled through central Texas, completely flooding the excavation site and forcing us to call off the inspection. The dinner was postponed because the stakeholders' flight got diverted to Dallas. Suddenly, my entire schedule cleared out. I remember feeling a wave of relief as I got into my truck. I was exhausted, my boots were muddy, and all I wanted was to surprise my wife, grab some takeout from our favorite Thai place down the street, and pour a heavy glass of bourbon. I tried calling Clara on the drive back to tell her the good news, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't think much of it. She often put her phone on Do Not Disturb when she was deep in a writing groove. I tried Leo next, but he didn't answer either. I figured they were both focused on their work, enjoying the quiet ambiance of the rain. The drive home took longer than usual because of the traffic on I-35, the windshield wipers slapping a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the glass. By the time I pulled into our neighborhood, the sun was beginning to set, casting a heavy, bruised purple hue over the suburban streets. I drove up our driveway and noticed Leo's battered old sedan was parked out front, but the house itself looked dark. Only the faint, warm glow of the living room lamp was visible through the front windows. I parked, grabbed my briefcase, and walked up the porch steps, feeling a sudden, pleasant anticipation. I imagined walking in, catching Clara by surprise, and seeing her face light up. I unlocked the front door quietly, taking care not to let the heavy wooden frame slam shut. The house smelled faintly of rain, vanilla candles, and something else, something warm and intimate that I couldn't quite place. I set my briefcase down on the entryway bench and stepped out of my muddy work boots. The silence in the house was heavy, almost thick, broken only by the steady drumming of rain against the roof. "Clara?" I called out softly, not wanting to startle her if she was focused. There was no answer. I walked through the entryway and into the kitchen, expecting to see her at the island with her laptop, but the counter was clean. I noticed 2 empty wine glasses sitting in the sink, a few drops of red wine still clinging to the glass. It was unusual for Clara to drink during the workday, but I rationalized it immediately. Maybe she and Leo had finished a big project and were celebrating. I turned toward the living room, intending to check the back patio, when I heard a sound coming from the hallway that led to our master bedroom. It was a soft, muffled noise, a low murmur of voices, followed by a sharp, choked intake of breath. My heart gave a strange, erratic thud in my chest. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was just a sudden, primal instinct that told me the air in my home had changed. I walked down the hallway, my socks making no sound against the hardwood floors. The door to our bedroom was cracked open just a few inches, a sliver of warm light spilling out onto the floor. As I got closer, the sounds became distinct, unmistakable, and a cold, paralyzing dread began to seep into my veins, freezing the blood in my tracks. The sound that froze me in that hallway wasn't a scream or a loud crash. It was a rhythmic, whispering friction of sheets and a soft, breathless laugh that belonged exclusively to my wife. It was the laugh she used when she was entirely happy, completely unburdened, and deeply connected to someone. But it wasn't directed at me. My hand hovered inches from the brass doorknob, trembling so violently I thought the vibration alone would give me away. The air in the hallway felt heavy and toxic, choking me as I forced myself to lean forward and look through the narrow vertical sliver of the cracked door. My brain, desperately trying to protect me, scrambled to construct any other explanation. Maybe the television was on. Maybe she was watching a movie. Maybe my mind was playing a cruel, stress-induced trick on me after a long week on the construction sites. But the human eye is ruthlessly efficient at recognizing the people it knows best, even in the dim, amber glow of a single bedside lamp. Through the gap, I saw them. Leo was sitting on the edge of our mattress, his back to me, his broad shoulders rising and falling with heavy, uneven breaths. Clara was sitting cross-legged in front of him, wearing an oversized gray sweater that I knew for a fact belonged to him, not me. Her hands were tangled in his hair, her fingers gripping the dark strands with a desperate, familiar intensity that made my stomach violently heave. I watched as he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, murmuring something so low and intimate that the words were swallowed by the sound of the rain outside. She smiled, a radiant, soft expression that I hadn't seen on her face in over a year. And then she kissed him. It wasn't a hurried, guilty kiss. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply practiced. It was the kiss of 2 people who had crossed the line so long ago that the guilt had already burned away, leaving behind a comfortable, established reality. The world around me tilted on its axis. A loud, rushing roar filled my ears, sounding like a freight train barreling through our quiet suburban home. Every single memory of the last 3 months flashed through my mind, recontextualized in a single agonizing second. The shared jokes I had interrupted, the sudden shift in Clara's wardrobe, the way Leo would look down at his plate whenever I talked about our plans for the future, or how we were hoping to start a family next year. They hadn't been accommodating my long hours. They had been counting down the minutes until my truck pulled out of the driveway every morning. They had turned the sanctuary I built, the home I paid for with 60-hour work weeks, into their private playground. I stood there, utterly paralyzed, watching my brother and my wife completely erase me from my own life. I wanted to kick the door off its hinges. I wanted to fly into the room, rip Leo away from her, and scream until my lungs tore. A primitive, violent rage surged from the soles of my feet, hot and blinding. But as quickly as the anger flared, a suffocating, icy numbness took its place. If I stormed in there now, it would become a scene. There would be crying, lying, frantic cover-ups, and the immediate, desperate scrambling of two cornered animals trying to minimize their damage. They would tell me it was the first time. They would tell me it didn't mean anything. They would try to manage my reaction, and in doing so, they would steal the truth from me. I realized, with a cold and terrifying clarity, that I didn't want their explanations. I wanted to see exactly how far the rot bite before I tore the whole structure down. Stepping backward with the agonizing slowness of a thief, I retreated down the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it felt physical, like a trapped bird trying to break through my chest. I picked up my briefcase from the entryway bench, slipped my feet back into my muddy work boots without tying them, and gently opened the front door. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut until the latch clicked into place with a soft, definitive sound. The torrential Texas rain was still coming down, instantly soaking through my button-down shirt and chilling me to the bone, but I barely felt it. I walked down the driveway, got into my truck, and sat there in the dark, staring at the front windows of my house. I started the engine, put the truck in reverse, and backed out into the street, parking under the shadow of a large live oak tree 3 houses down, where the streetlights couldn't illuminate my windshield. I turned off the headlights and just sat there, gripped by a profound, hollow shock. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type my passcode. I looked at the call log. My missed calls to Clara and Leo from an hour ago were sitting there, completely ignored. They had been too busy with each other to care that the man providing the roof over their heads was trying to reach them. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, the cool leather pressing against my burning forehead, and for the first time in my adult life, I wept. It wasn't just a quiet shedding of tears. It was a deep, guttural sob that tore out of my throat, muffled only by the sound of the storm hammering the roof of my truck. I felt like a ghost, a spectator watching the wreckage of my own existence from the outside. After 20 minutes, the crying stopped, replaced by a rigid, hollow stillness. The pain was still there, a massive, jagged wound in the center of my being, but a strange kind of survival instinct kicked in. I couldn't go back into that house tonight and pretend I hadn't seen anything. I couldn't look Leo in the eye while he drank my beer, and I couldn't let Clara kiss my cheek with the lips that had just been on my best friend. I needed a plan, and more than that, I needed space to think before the rage consumed me entirely and made me do something I'd regret for the rest of my life. I put the truck in drive and drove to a nondescript, mid-tier hotel near the highway, about 15 minutes away from our neighborhood. The lobby smelled of cheap carpet cleaner and stale coffee. The clerk behind the desk looked at me with a mixture of pity and indifference. I was drenched in rain, my clothes were wrinkled, and my eyes were bloodshot and swollen. I checked in under my own name, paid with a credit card I rarely used, and walked up to the third-floor room. The space was sterile and quiet, featuring a king-sized bed, a bolted-down television, and a window overlooking the wet, neon-lit highway. I dropped my briefcase on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall. The silence of the hotel room was deafening compared to the storm raging inside my head. I looked down at my phone again. It was 7:45 p.m. If my original schedule had held, I would currently be sitting in a steakhouse in San Antonio, talking about concrete pours and zoning permits. I decided to send Clara a text, a deliberate test to see what kind of lie she would construct. I typed out, "Hey babe, the weather got crazy down here, but the dinner is running late. Looks like I won't be home until midnight or maybe later. Don't wait up. Love you." I hit send, my thumb hovering over the screen as I watched the status change to delivered. The response didn't come immediately. They were probably still together, or maybe they were fixing dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that the fuse had already been lit. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. "Oh no, stay safe in the rain, sweetie. Sucks that it's running so late. Leo and I just ordered some food and we're just hanging out watching a movie. Take your time driving back. The roads must be awful. Love you too." I stared at the words on the screen, a grim, humorless smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. The casualness of the lie was what cut the deepest. There was no hesitation, no hint of guilt, no clumsy phrasing. She had woven the lie seamlessly into the fabric of our normal, everyday communication. She had even used Leo as a prop to make the story feel more mundane and believable.
She was protecting him, protecting their secret, and buried deep within that realization was a terrifying truth. This wasn't a sudden mistake. This was a lifestyle they had built right under my nose. I leaned back against the cheap hotel pillows, staring up at the popcorn ceiling, realizing that the man I used to be had died the moment I looked through that door crack. Now, I had to figure out who I was going to be tomorrow. I stayed awake for the entire night in that sterile hotel room, watching the headlights of semi-trucks cut across the popcorn ceiling as they rolled down the highway. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of them printed itself onto the back of my eyelids with the searing intensity of a flashbulb. The oversized gray sweater, her fingers tangled in his hair, the slow, practiced ease of their lips meeting. By 4 a.m, the agonizing shock had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, calculating resolve that I didn't know I possessed. I had spent my entire professional life managing multi-million-dollar commercial construction projects. I knew how to look at a structurally compromised building, identify the points of failure, and methodically dismantle it before it collapsed on top of everyone. My marriage was dead. My brotherhood was dead. Now it was just a matter of logistics. When the sun finally rose, casting a pale, overcast light through the window, I washed my face with cold water and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, and a dark shadow of stubble covered my jaw, but the trembling had stopped. I looked steady. I called my office and told my assistant that I was dealing with a sudden family emergency and would be completely off the grid for the next 48 hours. Then I drove to a local electronics store as soon as the doors opened at 8 o'clock. I bought 3 small, high-definition security cameras, the kind that looked like standard USB wall chargers, and plugged directly into an outlet. They were motion-activated, entirely silent, and streamed directly to an app on my phone via a private cloud. If they were going to turn my home into a stage, the least I could do was set up the lights. I drove back to my neighborhood around 9:30. I knew Clara's routine. On Fridays, she always left the house between 10 and 11 to go to a local coffee shop for a weekly writers' meetup, and Leo usually used that time to head to the gym or drop off his laundry. I parked a street over, waiting under the cover of a massive live oak until I saw Clara's compact SUV pull out of the driveway, followed 5 minutes later by Leo's battered sedan. The coast was clear. I walked up to my own front door, unlocking it with a strange hollow sensation in my chest. The house smelled exactly like it had the night before, vanilla candles and betrayal. I worked quickly, my hands completely stable. I placed the first camera in the living room, plugged into an outlet behind the media console, angled perfectly to capture the couch where Leo supposedly slept. The second went into the kitchen, tucked neatly between the espresso machine and a decorative knife block, covering the entire central island. The third, and the hardest to install without making myself physically sick, went into our master bedroom. I plugged it into an outlet beside my nightstand, hidden behind a stack of hardcover books, with a clear, unobstructed view of the mattress where I had slept next to my wife for 4 years. I verified all 3 feeds on my phone, ensuring the quality was crisp and the audio capture was sensitive enough to pick up a whisper. I left the house exactly as I found it, making sure not to leave a single footprint behind.
For the next 3 days, I lived out of that hotel room and a rental SUV, pretending to be trapped at a chaotic, stalled job site out in West Texas. I exchanged regular, pleasant text messages with Clara. I asked how her writing was going. I asked if Leo had found any leads on a job. I played the part of the oblivious, hard-working husband perfectly, feeding them the exact sense of security they needed to keep letting their guards down. And every single hour, my phone would buzz with motion alerts from the Cloud app. Watching the footage was a masterclass in psychological torture, but I couldn't look away. It turned out my estimate of 3 months was wildly optimistic. The sheer comfort they displayed with each other, the casual domesticity of their interactions, spoke to an affair that had been brewing long before Leo ever packed his suitcases and moved onto our couch. I watched them cook breakfast together in their underwear, dancing around the kitchen island to music I couldn't hear. I watched them sit on the living room rug, sharing a bottle of the expensive vintage wine I had saved for our upcoming anniversary, laughing as Leo reached over and traced the line of her collarbone. But the worst of it happened in the bedroom. Seeing the man I called my brother lie on my side of the bed, laughing with my wife while they spoke about me in pitying, dismissive tones, hardened something inside my chest into solid stone. "Do you think he suspects anything?" Leo asked her on Sunday afternoon, his bare chest propped up against our pillows, as Clara brushed her hair in front of the vanity mirror. Clara didn't even pause. She just let out a soft, mocking chuckle. "Mark, please. He's too busy looking at blueprints and concrete mixtures to notice anything. He lives in his own little world. Honestly, it's almost sad how much he trusts people." Hearing those words come out of her mouth, the woman who had held my hand when my father died, the woman who promised to love me in sickness and in health, extinguished the very last ember of grief inside of me. The sadness was gone, entirely replaced by a cold, calculating malice. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. They thought my trust was a flaw they could exploit indefinitely while they lived off my hard work. I closed the app, locked my phone, and called the top-rated family law attorney in the Austin metro area, booking an emergency consultation for the following morning. Mr. Vance was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s, with a reputation for being a sharp in high-asset divorces. I sat across from him in his high-rise office downtown, placing a flash drive containing 50 gigabytes of crystal-clear video and audio evidence on his glass desk. I didn't cry. I didn't vent. I simply laid out the financial facts. The house was bought entirely with my inheritance money before we got married. The corporate accounts were strictly in my name, and the prenuptial agreement we had signed explicitly stated that in the event of documented infidelity, the at-fault party waived all rights to spousal support and asset division. Vance plugged the drive into his laptop, clicked through a few files, and looked up at me over his gold-rimmed glasses. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Mr. Harrison, in 30 years of matrimonial law, I don't think I've ever seen a client hand me a case this ironclad on a silver platter. You didn't just catch them, you built a federal case against them.
If we file this correctly, your wife is going to walk away from this marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back, and your friend is going to find himself on the street by the end of the week." "I don't just want a standard filing, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice low and completely devoid of emotion. "I want the papers served in a very specific way, at a very specific time. I want them to realize exactly when the trap closed around them." The date of our 4th wedding anniversary was a Tuesday, and I had orchestrated every single detail of that evening with the precision of a controlled demolition. For weeks, Clara had been dropping subtle hints about wanting a quiet night in, claiming she wanted to cook a nice dinner for just the two of us to celebrate. I knew the truth, of course. The cameras had shown her and Leo planning the menu together, laughing about how they would share the leftovers the next day while I was back out on the job sites. They had become so comfortable in their shared delusion that they genuinely believed they were the masters of this house, and I was merely the landlord who paid the bills. I arrived home at exactly 6:30 in the evening. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, carrying a massive bouquet of red roses and a beautifully wrapped jewelry box. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary. Clara came running out of the kitchen, wearing a stunning black dress, Her face lit up with a brilliant, practiced smile. She threw her arms around my neck, kissing me deeply. If I hadn't spent the last 2 weeks watching her do the exact same thing to my best friend on our living room rug, I would have sworn she was entirely in love with me. "Happy anniversary, sweetie," she murmured against my ear, pulling back to look at the flowers. "You look incredible. Look at you, all dressed up." "Only the best for tonight, babe," I replied, my voice smooth, steady, and utterly devoid of the rage that had once consumed me. "Where's Leo? I thought he'd be around." "Oh, he went out to grab some drinks and meet up with a potential freelance client," Clara said, her eyes flashing with that familiar, seamless deceit. "He said he wanted to give us our space tonight. He's so thoughtful like that." I smiled, letting the irony wash over me. "He really is a great friend. Let's sit down. I actually want to give you your gift before we eat." We walked into the living room and she sat eagerly on the edge of the couch, her eyes locked on the small jewelry box in my hand. I handed it to her, watching as she carefully pulled the satin ribbon away. She lifted the lid, expecting to see the diamond necklace she had been eyeing for months. Instead, her breath caught sharply in her throat, and the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking completely ghost-white in the warm lamplight. Inside the box was a single high-capacity silver flash drive, labeled simply, "Our living room, kitchen, and bedroom." Before she could even find her voice to speak, the heavy wooden front door opened, and Leo walked into the entryway, carrying a grocery bag filled with wine. "Hey guys, happy anniversary! I forgot my keys, but the door was—" Leo froze mid-sentence as he stepped into the living room and caught sight of my suit, my expression, and the terrifying silence hanging in the air. At that exact moment, right on cue, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the open front door. 2 men in dark business suits stepped inside. One was Mr. Vance's senior process server, holding 2 thick manila folders. The other was a private security guard, a burly, imposing man standing over 6 feet tall, carrying a stack of flat-rate moving boxes. The process server walked straight past Leo, handing the first folder directly to Clara, who was now trembling so violently she dropped the jewelry box onto the floor. "Clara Harrison, you are being formally served with a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery. You have 20 days to respond." The server then turned to Leo, thrusting the second folder against his chest. "Leo Vance, you are being served with a formal eviction notice from this property, effective immediately. You have exactly 30 minutes to clear your personal belongings from the premises under the supervision of the private security officer present." "Mark, what is this?" Leo stammered, his face turning an unearthly shade of gray as his hands began to shake against the grocery bag. "Bro, come on, whatever you think is happening." "Don't call me bro," I said, my voice dropping to a low, quiet whisper that cut through the room like a razor blade. "I watched you, Leo. I watched you on my side of the bed. I watched you drink my wine. I listened to my wife call me pathetic while you laughed. Every single second of it is recorded on that drive in her hand, and the cloud backups are already with my legal team. Your design business is dead in this city, Leo. I've already sent the footage to your top 3 prospective clients. You are completely finished here." Clara burst into a frantic, hysterical sob, throwing herself off the couch and dropping to her knees at my feet, grabbing the cuffs of my suit trousers. "Mark, please, please, it was a mistake. He took advantage of me. I was lonely. I swear it didn't mean anything. Please don't do this to us. We can go to counseling. We can fix this." I stepped back, pulling my leg away from her grip with a feeling of profound, clinical detachment. I looked down at her, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt absolutely nothing. "The prenuptial agreement you signed states that documented infidelity waives all asset division and spousal support," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You have exactly 30 minutes to pack 1 suitcase of clothes. The locks are being changed the second you step off my porch. The house is mine. The accounts are mine. You are leaving with nothing." The next half hour was a blur of frantic, humiliated chaos. The security guard stood over Leo as he hastily stuffed his clothes into the cardboard boxes,
weeping openly as the reality of his total ruin set in. Clara was a complete wreck, screaming, begging, and throwing things, but the security guard remained completely immovable, directing her toward the door. At exactly 7:15, the guard escorted both of them out onto the front porch and pulled the heavy wooden door shut. Through the window, I watched them stand under the porch light, my wife in her beautiful anniversary dress, my best friend holding 2 cardboard boxes of his life's worth of belongings, both of them completely homeless, broke and exposed to the world. A locksmith's van pulled into the driveway right behind them. I walked back into the kitchen, the scent of the roasted garlic dinner still lingering in the air. I poured myself a double shot of the expensive bourbon I had saved, walked over to the kitchen island, and took a slow, deep sip. The house was completely silent again, but for the first time in 3 months, the air felt completely clean. I had lost the 2 most important people in my life, but as I stood there in the quiet of my own home, I realized I hadn't lost myself. I was still standing, and tomorrow I would start building something new.